Okay, good evening, everybody. We are holding in Maseches Megillah. We're holding Daf Ches, which is considered page 8a at the top. That's what we're holding. And as we mentioned in previous classes, we're going through a series of events. The Mishnah has chosen a whole series of things which we call the Ein Bains. They started off by saying there's no difference between, we had a Mishnah that said there's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar, other than the fact that in the second Adar you read the Megillah, and the first Adar you don't. That was what the Mishnah had said. And then we analyzed that. And that, of course, is apropos to Purim. But once we started going into things that are Ein Bain, there's no difference between this and that, things that are normally comparable. So now the Mishnah is continuing because that's the way the Mishnah operates. It can segue from topic to topic, which, just as an aside, is why people like the Rambam wrote, that's why the Rambam wrote his magnum opus, called Yad HaChazaka, his halacha book. Because when you learn the halacha out of the Gemara or out of the Mishnah, one of the handicaps of learning the halacha out of the Mishnah or the Gemara is that you can have topics that have technically nothing to do with Purim, and they find themselves in the tractate Megillah, which is ostensibly a tractate speaking about Purim. And yet these are topics that don't have anything to do with Purim per se, which is what we're going to be covering some of those tonight. So therefore, if you needed to know the law, right, if you were looking for a halacha, and you wanted to open up a book that was going to tell you the halacha, you'd go nuts trying to find the law in the Gemara because it could be any place. You're looking for something that has to do with Passover, but it might appear in a completely different tractate. That's why the Rambam reorganized all of the halacha deliberately so that it was, if you're looking for Passover laws, you'll find them in Passover. If you're looking for laws of vows, you're going to find those in vows. If you're looking for laws of Shabbat, it's going to be in Shabbat. He was the first one to really codify in that form. Okay.
And what was his book called?
Yad HaChazaka is what we call the Rambam.
Oh, okay.
That which we refer to colloquially today as the Rambam is exactly that's his book of halacha. Okay? So now we're off on some significant tangents that have absolutely nothing to do technically with Purim, but what they do fall under the heading of is Ein Bain, two things that normally would be comparable, and the Mishnah is going to tell us there's no difference between these two. Technically, they're both the same, except for, and the Mishnah is going to give us what the exception is. And that's going to be the syntax now, one Mishnah after the next. Okay? So here we go. You cold? Yeah, you're cold? I'm sorry, because I'm kind of hot tonight. So I turned on the air conditioner. Okay, so now we're getting into what we call Moeder Hana'ah. A guy, Reuven and Shimon are friends. They might even be relatives. One of them, for whatever reason, he got angry or some other reason, whatever, he takes an oath, a vow, that either A, I will never benefit anything, I will never benefit from that other guy, or he can actually take a different vow. He could take a vow saying, that guy can never benefit from me. So even though technically the other guy didn't participate in the vow at all, but the fact that the first guy took this vow, it's going to affect that the second guy can't benefit anything from him. Right? That's called moeder, or like from the root neder, taking a vow, of hana, derivation of benefit. So in our Mishnah, what happened is there's two forms of vows that we're going to describe. The Mishnah says, "Ein bein hamoider hanoah mechaveroi lamoider mimenu ma'achol." A person could say that he doesn't want this guy. Either he's saying that he is taking an oath that he will never benefit from anything that has anything to do with that guy, or the other way around. He's taking an oath saying that that guy can never benefit from anything that's mine. Okay? So he can either take that oath blanket, completely and totally, or he could take an oath that has to do only with food. That guy can't eat my food. He's never allowed to have any benefit from me that has to do with food. So the Mishnah is going to tell us a very interesting thing. Even in the event that the whole oath he took was only in reference to quote-unquote food, it doesn't necessarily mean eating his food. It means machshira eichel also. In other words, if he benefits from, if the guy who took the oath, we'll call him Ruvain. Shimon is the guy who now the oath has become, so to speak, imposed upon, right? If Shimon benefits from Ruvain financially in any way, we say that this is money he could use, whatever his benefit is, this is money he could use to buy food. So while the blanket prohibition covers everything under the sun, and the food oath only covers technically food, but the fact of the matter is it covers a wider thing than food. It covers any sort of monetary gain whatsoever, because any sort of monetary gain can be converted to food. Go.
Is that second oath even valid? Because how can you say this person won't benefit from me? If he does, then how can that person be sinning? How can person A be sinning if person B benefits from person A?
He's not allowed to benefit from them.
But
It's
I'm
not
saying
sin. It's not about sinning. It's prohibited.
the
He's
oath-
not.
How's that oath valid? Because person B is
A
breaking person's A oath.
Because the oath is technically on person A.
Right. So if person B eats from person A, how is person A?
It's not about doing an avera.
Is that an oath?
It's about a violation of an oath.
Right.
A's oath becomes violated.
Exactly. But how can A's oath become violated without him doing it?
But we have to make sure that B doesn't do anything to have A violate his oath.
But he can't be a 24-hour policeman of B.
Yes, we can. We're going to prohibit him from participating.
Okay. So you're saying it's a valid oath for A to...
Yeah, 100%.
He has to know about it.
Of course. So the Mishnah says there's no difference. What would be the only difference between them? So in other words, basically the law then therefore is the same, right? So what would be an example of something where it's not the same? So the Mishnah says, Drisas regel, walking through B, walking through A's property. And the Gemara is going to have to define that for us. And the second is, Kalim shein oisim behem oichel nefesh. The use of any sort of, that in the second vow, where he only caused the prohibition that had to do with food, so the B can use A's stuff that has nothing to do with food. He can use his baseball bat. That he can do. Okay? Now, so that's the whole Mishnah. Boom. Now, so before we get into the Gemara, which isn't very long on it, let's make sure we understand what we're saying here. So a person who makes a blanket vow, B cannot benefit from me whatsoever under any circumstances. So B, even though there's like a prescriptive easement, you familiar with the term prescriptive easement? He's familiar. Anyone that has anything to do with real estate knows what prescriptive easements are. Okay? A prescriptive easement means, in modern real estate law, what that means is if a guy has a big piece of property, or the huge acres of land in the middle of nowhere, and all the people who live in the middle of nowhere have been the people in the middle of nowhere this side. When they need to get to the people who live in the middle of nowhere on that side, they drive across this guy's property because it's just sitting there, right? And they've been doing this for years. Now, one day, this guy decides, okay, real estate is starting to get hot in this area. That's why I bought this ridiculous piece of land so many years ago, and I've been holding on to it. Now I'm going to develop the land. So in American law, it's not so simple. I'm simplifying it. But in American law, the people that have been walking across or driving across this property for years can say they have a prescriptive easement. He has to leave that road sitting there. Even though they never asked him for permission, but they've been doing it for so many years, you can have a prescriptive easement on the land. So in halacha, we have the same concept. Generally speaking, if you have a big open piece of land, you don't mind if people walk across it. And so people get to walk across it for free. You can't destroy somebody's field, but you can use somebody's field as a shortcut by Torah law. Okay? So now the question is, can this guy walk across that guy's field as a shortcut? So if the oath he took was a blanket oath, this guy cannot benefit from anything that is mine, then he can't walk across the field either. Because he's benefiting, even though technically it's free and anybody can walk across. So it's not actually a monetary benefit, but it is a benefit. He's getting to go through a shortcut through the guy's property, right? So since he took an oath that said this guy can't have any benefit from anything that's mine, anything that has anything to do with me, then the guy can't walk across. But if the oath he took was only about food, and people walk across that field anyway for free, so this guy, so B walking across A's field does not provide B with any monetary benefit, and it of course doesn't provide it with any actual food benefit, but it doesn't even provide it with any monetary benefit because it's free to walk across. And since the prohibition is only an oath that has to do with food, and food, we said, extends to any sort of monetary benefit, because monetary benefit can be used to be able to buy food. Since there's no monetary benefit, he can walk across.
So what are the consequences of B violating A's oath?
There has to be consequences.
Yeah, otherwise what's the point? No,
It's prohibited.
there's no consequences at all? If B, like, every day violates A's oath?
There could be consequences if A allows B to violate his oath. Maybe. You have to learn the Dharam. We're not doing the Dharam now. That's the bottom line of our Mishnah. Okay, that's the only difference. So now the Mishnah says, so if you're telling me that the only difference is walking across a field that belongs to A and the use of vessels that have nothing to do with food. So it seems to be what you're saying. But if we're talking about vessels that you do make food with, they're both going to be equal. So in other words, any form of cooking utensils would be prohibited to be in either oath. Any form of cooking utensils would be, because that has to do with food, So whether he took a blanket oath, which of course covers everything, or whether he only took an oath about food, which would only cover foodstuffs, the use of pots and pans, knives, etc., would be prohibited to be under those circumstances. That's what it says, the same in both. Okay. So the Gemara says, now, so that explains the first half of the Mishnah. What about the second half of the Mishnah? Drisas regel, the prohibition against walking across, that in the first form of vow, where it's a blanket vow, you can't walk across the guy's field. But in the second vow, you can. So the Gemara says, Halikapti inchi. You're talking about something that nobody really cares about. And since A doesn't really care about anybody walking across his field, you can't really call this a benefit that's being bestowed upon B. You follow the question? Because everybody can do it. So it's not a specific benefit to B. It's across the board. Right? So the Gemara answers, Amar Rava, so Rava answers, Homani, who is this? The opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar, Vitur Aser B'Moed Hana. He says that even gratuities are forbidden from a vow of benefit. In other words, even something that doesn't cost you any money, and even something that everybody gets, is still prohibited. So that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, we finished that Mishnah. We move on. Ein ben nedar v'nedavis. There's no difference. We have two words, neder and nedava. Neder is a vow. Let's see how he translates it in English. Vow and gift. Offerings. We're talking about sacrifices. Okay? Neder and nedava. Two different things. So what's the difference between them? They both seem like things that you want to give a gift of a sacrifice to the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Ein ben nedarim v'nedav is the only difference between a neder and a nedava. Eloshan nedarim chayiv b'achriyuson. Nedarim, you are obligated to take responsibility for their loss. And nedavos ein chayiv b'achriyuson. And the Gemara is about to, we're going to give us an insight and preview of the Gemara. What's the difference between a neder and a nedavar? Okay. A guy wants to bring a sacrifice to the Beis HaMikdash as a gift. There's two ways he can make a declaration. He could say, I take upon myself to bring a burnt offering to the Beit HaMikdash, Ola, an Ola sacrifice. Or he could point to a specific cow he has amongst his cattle, and he could say, Harei zu Ola. This cow is an Ola. It's going to be an Ola. And even logic tells you the difference between the two. If a guy says, Harei Olai Ola, yeah, I take upon myself to bring an Ola offering. And then afterwards, he makes a declaration. He says, you know that Ola offering that I took upon myself? This cow is going to be the one I'm going to use for it. This is the cow I'm going to use for that offering. And now that cow gets killed or disappears, wanders off. So now the question is he still obligated to, does he have to bring another one? What's the answer? Of course, yes. Why? Because his original declaration was, I take upon myself an Ola. Then at that point, the obligation is on him. And so, come what may, he has to make sure that an Ola gets to the Beit HaMikdash. If the first one he designated doesn't make it there, then he has to bring another one. The job has got to get done because it's on him. Got it? Because he said, Harei Olai. He took it upon himself. If he says, Harei zu Ola, then he hasn't taken the responsibility on him. He's placed the Ola designation right from the start on this particular cow. So if that cow either gets blemished, so now it can't be brought as a sacrifice, or it gets lost, or it dies along the way, he's no longer obligated to replace it because he never took upon himself a responsibility to bring an ola. He put upon this cow that it's going to be an ola. So the responsibility, to borrow from the concept, lives and dies with the cow. If he says Harei Olai, then we don't care.
Why don't you care?
A guy signs a pledge card for $1 million to Chabad of Brentwood. Right?
Common occurrence.
Yosef's laughing over there. He thinks this is funny. I don't think this is funny. What?
I know it's a real life example.
It's a real life example, exactly. And the guy signs a pledge card. I'm going to give Chabad of Brentwood $1 million. Okay? 2 months later, Rabbi Hecht comes and says, okay, I have this pledge card from you for $1 million. Time to pay. Oh, Rabbi, you don't know my business, what has happened. Rabbi Hecht says, you have an obligation. You've signed an obligation to give $1 million. It's of no consequence to me. What's going on in... doesn't mean anything to me. Right? But what if the guy says, I have $1 million sitting in this bank account. I'm taking this $1 million and I'm buying this particular stock because I know this is a good stock to buy right now. I got a really hot tip from a hedge fund manager to buy this stock. So here's the $1 million. I'm investing, but I'm going to give you. But first, I'm going to invest in this stock. And then I'm going to short it or long it or whatever it is I'm supposed to do. When I make the huge profit on it, I'm giving you the $1 million. I'm going to keep the profit. And of course, he goes and buys the stock and, okay, goodbye $1 million. Now when the rabbi comes and says, wait a minute, where's my money? He says, your money got lost in the stock market. Can you see the difference? So halachically, there's 2 different sets of responsibilities here. Okay. Just to share a funny story. When I first came to Los Angeles almost 41 years ago, my main job was at Chabad West Coast headquarters in Westwood as a fundraiser. That was my job, to raise money. I was given a list of donors who were donors to Chabad, and I was supposed to develop them, get them to either make sure that we don't lose them as donors, at worst, and at best, get them to give more, maybe even to introduce us to their friends so we can get more donors. That was my job. They called it Director of Development. Okay. What a name. That's like calling a janitor a custodial engineer. Okay. Anyway, so there was this one guy who had said on his record in the computer that he gives $1,800 every year in November, and he hates being solicited. But if you call him in November, he'll give you $1,800 every year. And he was put on my list. So my job was to at least maintain the $1,800 a year that he gives. It came November. I called him. I get him on the phone and I said, hello, Mr. So-and-so. I'm Rabbi Hecht, Chabad of California, blah, blah, blah. You give us $1,800 every year. You give us $1,800 every year. And I'm calling to get your $1,800 pledge to make sure you get it. You've sent it in. He said, Rabbi, what moon are you living on? I said, what? What are you talking about? He said, are you not aware of what's going on in the world? You're not familiar with what's going on in the world? I said, I consider myself someone who's relatively familiar with what's going on in the world. He said, did you hear Black October? That was the year of Black October. This was November. He said, are you aware that the stock market crashed last month? I said, I actually am aware. Yeah, I am aware. I don't understand. He said, after such a stock market crash, you're still calling me for $1,800? So I said to him, Mr. So-and-so, I'm really, really sorry. You're 100% right. I apologize. I apologize for asking you for your $1,800. But let me just explain. The reason why I had the chutzpah to ask you for the $1,800 was because I'm looking at your donor record and you've given $1,800 every single year for the last 7 years. Now, to my knowledge, over the last 7 years, the stock market went up every single year. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, over the last 6 or 7 years, the stock market went up about 10 times. But your donation remained flat. And so because of that, I just assumed that your contributions were not tied to the stock market. Had I known, of course I wouldn't have asked you for $1,800. But looking at your donor record over the years, it doesn't look like your donations are tied to the stock market. And that's why I just assumed I can ask you for $1,800 again. But thank you for bringing it to my attention that it was ridiculous for me to ask you that. I didn't say another word. Silence on the phone. Silence for about, to me, it felt like 10 minutes, but it was probably more like 10 seconds. Okay? And he goes, okay, send me an envelope. I'll send you the $1,800. Checkmate. You got the message, right? Okay, that's a funny side story. Okay? But that's the difference between a neder and a davar. A neder is harei a lie. I'm taking it upon myself. So if you take it upon yourself, if it's your pledge that you took on yourself, it makes no difference what happened to whatever you thought was going to be the money. It makes no difference which cow you subsequently designate. You have to get a sacrifice to the Beit HaMikdash. You have to get one to Jerusalem. If the first one you tried didn't work, you got to find another one. You got to keep trying. If you say harei zu, this cow is now an ola, then it's only this cow. And if that cow disappears, dies, etc., 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 then your obligation dies with the cow. Got it? So that's the difference between a neder and a nedava. And the Gemara is going to describe that in a few words. So we're going to go through it very quickly now that we already know it. But just we're still in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said the only difference between a neder and a nedava is that in a neder you're obligated for the pledge no matter what happens. It's the responsibility is on you. And in a nedava, the responsibility is not on you. That's what the Mishnah said. Now we'll jump into the Gemara and go through it quickly because we already discussed it. Okay? So the Gemara says, okay, every one of these Ein Bain Mishnahs means that when the Mishnah says there's no difference other than this one thing, then the Mishnah is also alluding to some other halacha where they're both the same. So every one of these Mishnahs is going to go, okay, if the Mishnah pointed out that this is the only difference between them, then X, they must both be the same. That's the syntax. We're going to go one after the other throughout the Gemara like this. That's the way it's going to go. Okay? So the Gemara is going to say, okay, if you're saying that the only difference between the Durham and the Davis is that in Neder you have an obligation to fulfill it no matter what, and in a Dava you don't. So the Gemara says, "Hola inyan bal ta'acher zeh v'zeh shavin." But when it comes to the mitzvah of bal ta'acher, the Torah says that if a person, I'll quote the full verse. It's not here on the side. It's going to be here in the footnotes. Yeah. Ish, a person, ki yidin neder la Hashem, who makes a neder, a pledge, a vow to God, or yishava shua. I'm sorry, wrong verse. Messed that one up. Here we are. Ki sidr neder la Hashem, if a person takes a vow to Hashem Elokecha, to the Lord your God, loi sa'acher l'shalmoi, do not delay paying it. Now, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah has a whole discussion. There's a few opinions on how we define Baal Ta'acher. Usually it's 3 holidays. The question is it 3 holidays starting from the beginning of the year or the next 3 holidays after you made the pledge? But that's a discussion in another Gemara. Whichever opinion is correct makes no difference. There's this mitzvah that you're not allowed to delay it. You're supposed to try to bring it right away. You're not allowed to delay it. But to quote the verse again that we just quoted, the verse only says kisider neder. Only talks about neder. Doesn't talk about nidava, this other classification. So you might think that it only applies to neder. This Baal Ta'acher, the prohibition against delaying bringing it, but not nidava. So therefore the Gemara comes and tells you, no, when it comes to Baal Ta'acher, shalmoi, you have to, it's equal in both. Whether neder or nidava, you have to do it right away. So in other words, if you designated this cow to be brought as an olah, you can't just let it sit around now. You have to make sure that it gets to Jerusalem and is sacrificed as an olah. Again, a quick side story. This is a true story. The other one was also a true story. This is a true story. My wife's great-grandfather was a Chabadnik who came to the United States 1900, around 1900, maybe even 1898. There was a small group, maybe even not such a small group of Chabadniks that left Russia and left Eastern Europe and came to the United States. As a result, he was one of the people that was very instrumental in bringing the previous Rebbe to America and bringing Chabad to the United States when it came World War II. But he came before World War I. He was a pious man with a long flowing beard, etc., but he was a businessman and a relatively successful businessman. The previous Rebbe was arrested by the Soviet police in 1927 and then ultimately released, which is a story in its own right. After the previous Rebbe was released from the Soviet prison, he was basically kicked out of Russia. Part of the condition of them releasing him was that he would leave.
Was it the U.S. government?
The U.S. government was very instrumental in getting that release, yes. Okay? And my wife's great-grandfather was part of that group of people that were the movers and shakers that got the U.S. government involved.
Oh.
Okay. So the previous Rebbe, after he left Russia, he wound up traveling. He traveled around the world, which was unusual. He's the only leader of Chabad that really traveled. Only Chabad leader that was in the land of Israel.
Oh, wow.
Was in Eretz Yisrael. He was the only one. Of all the leaders of Chabad, he's the only one who went to Eretz Yisrael. Okay. He traveled around the world, including the United States. Ultimately, he settled in Poland. I was there for another 10 years till the outbreak of World War II. And then he came to America for good. On his arrival in America, he was like a celebrity. Everyone in America knew about the story that he had been arrested by the Soviet police, et cetera, and subsequently released. So they made a big fundraising dinner to raise money for his work and all the things he was still doing in the Soviet Union, and et cetera. At that fundraising dinner, obviously the Cunin family attended. And great-grandfathers, they were all involved in the stock market. And great-grandpa Mendel, together with his sons, made a significant pledge at the dinner. Made a very significant pledge at the dinner. The day after the dinner, I heard the story from my father-in-law's father. He told me the story himself. He was one of those sons. The day after the dinner, Zayda Mendel called together his sons and said, we're selling stock. And they said, why are we selling stock? So he said, because we have to pay this pledge. We made a very big pledge to the Rebbe. So we're going to sell a huge amount of stock so we can pay the pledge and we'll have other monies. We're going to liquidate. One or two of the brothers said, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. The stock market is going nuts. If we hold on, we'll make so much more money, we'll be able to give the Rebbe even more money. And Zayda Mendel said, no, absolutely not. That's not the way we do things in the Cunin family. In our family, we make a pledge, we pay. We made a pledge last night at a dinner, today we're paying it. you have these machinations that we're going to be able to give the Rebbe much more money. That's for Hashem to decide, not us. We made a pledge of tzedakah, we're paying it today. End. And according to Zaidi David, who was my father-in-law's father, who was a very sweet and special man, he said one brother refused to sell. Everyone else said, okay, if dad says we're selling, we're selling. One brother absolutely refused to sell. It was 1929.
Mhm.
The crash was like, I think, a week later or 2 weeks later. And that brother lost everything. Everybody else got out okay. Huh? Because they went to, they sold, right. Stock market crash, 1929.
Wow.
Cool story, no?
Yeah, that is cool.
They all sold and they paid the pledge.
They sold everything. I was thinking they were just gonna sell what they needed.
No,
to
no,
sell
they
that
sold
ocean.
much more than that. They sold
Huh.
out, yeah.
Wow,
They
that's
liquidated.
crazy.
Anyway, yeah. Zaidi David would never tell us which one of the brothers refused to sell. Which one of his brothers was the one that didn't sell. Whatever. So we have a mitzvah in the Torah. Lo yisa'acher l'shalmoi. The Torah is very explicit. Do not delay paying your pledge. You made a pledge, pay it. Now, what does do not delay? Like I said, in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and other places in the Talmud, they debate how much time you actually have that you will not violate this prohibition. But once you go beyond that time, you violated the prohibition, you're out the door. Okay. But lo ta'acher, even though the Torah says it in reference to neder, it applies also to nedava. Now the Gemara says, Ezehu nedava, I'm sorry, Tanan Hasam, we learned over there in the Mishnah, in the Darim. Ezehu neder, what's considered a neder, which we already discussed. A neder is someone who says, I take upon myself that an ola needs to be brought. Ezo nedava, what do we call nedava? Nedava is zu oila. Somebody who says this animal is going to be an ola offering. What then is the difference the Mishnah says between a neder and a nedava? Nedarim, when a person says, Harei olai, I'm taking upon myself to do this. In a neder, mesu, if the animal dies that you designated afterwards, I nignavu, or it got stolen, I avdu, or the animal that you designated afterwards got lost, chai bachrius, and you have to keep bringing animals until you get it done, because you took it upon yourself. Nedava is, but in a nedava where you said this animal, harei zu, this is going to be an ola, meso nignavu avdu, if it died, or it got stolen, or it got lost, then you're not obligated to bring a different one. The Gemara says, where'd you get this from? You made a statement, that's the difference between a neder and a dava, but you have to have a verse in the Torah to base yourself on. You can't just make these things up. So the Gemara answers, the Tana Rabbanan, our sages taught us, the Torah says it will be accepted for him to atone for him. So Reb Shimon says, we're in 882. So Reb Shimon says, Es sha'alav, that which is on him, chayv achriyosei. You have to make sure that you fulfill it. And she'ene olav, that which is not on you, it's only on the animal, ein chayv achriyosei. So the Gemara asks, my mashma, how is this implied in the words upon him? How do you get it from those words? Amar Yitzchak bar Avdimi says, Kiven the Amar a lie. Once a guy says it's on me, command the toina kasvetam. It's like it's a burden that he's carrying on his shoulders, and it's never released from his shoulders until he gets it done. The burden is always there. An albatross, as that would be the euphemism today. Okay. So we finished that Mishnah. We finished two Mishnahs and their Gemara. We'll start a third one. This one requires an introduction. Okay. Emissions. So female emissions, there's two kinds of female emissions in the Torah. There's the female emission that's called nida, which technically is a menstrual cycle. There's another form of female emission that's called zava, a flow. What exactly that is for a woman in today's day and age, we actually don't really know.
Is emission impurity?
It makes her impure. Yes. These two different kinds of emissions make her impure. Now, you have to know, this is very important to know this. Biblically, the laws of Nida and Zava are very different. Very different, especially in the cleansing process. The Nida, from the moment she starts to see a flow, she counts 7 days, even while there's a flow going. At the end of that 7 days, assuming the flow has stopped, Anida goes to the mikveh and she's okay. A Zava, it's not the case. A Zava has to count 7 clean days before she goes to the mikveh. The Nida has to count 7 days, including her not clean days. Get it?
Sorry, what's a nida? And
Okay, so these are two terms in the Torah that I'm not sure we really have a modern parallel explanation. And because of that, and it's been that way for a very long time. So in the times of the Talmud, prior to the times of the Talmud, or in the early period of the Talmud, women knew when their flow was an Ida and when their flow was Zava. Even though technically both looked the same, it was both blood, both bleeding. Okay? And women knew because technically, using Talmudic terms, we're going to be talking about the male counterpart in a minute. I'm using the female counterpart as an introduction. Okay? Technically, a nida was her actual menstrual cycle. And because a nida was a menstrual cycle in Torah, by Torah law, a menstrual cycle has its time and should be very consistent. Zava for a woman, biblically, and the way the Talmud explains it biblically, was her experiencing a flow not during her menstrual cycle. That would be considered Zava. Now, like I said, the laws are much stricter for Zava than they are for Nida. In Talmudic times, I think maybe before that, our sages said that we've blurred those two. And even though it seems like we can tell Nida from Zava, we're not really sure anymore. The women aren't experts on it, and we're not experts on it. And so therefore, we're going to apply the stringencies of Zava to Nida. To every woman that has any sort of flow, we're going to assume it's Zava, not Nida. And therefore, today's day and age, when a woman has her menstrual cycle, at the end of that time period, she has to, from without going into too much of the detail because it would take us too far afield, okay? From the moment she starts having her menstrual cycle, she has to count a minimum of 5 days. If her menstrual cycle lasts longer than that, then she has to continue counting. Once her menstrual cycle ends, she begins to count 7 clean days. And at the end of those 7 clean days, that's when she goes to the mikveh and she could be once again with her husband. That's the extraordinarily simple presentation.
Saying she could technically be a Zava first day of the cycle?
We consider it all Zava today.
First day of the cycle?
Today, that's what we don't call it. And they still use the word nida, but from a halachic standpoint, we're considering it zava. That's why a woman needs to count 5 and 7. If it was true biblical nida, she only has to count 7 and go to the mikveh.
But a woman whose cycle is regular,
Still doesn't make a difference. We still apply
or no, that's right.
we still apply zava laws to that. I'm teaching a class. Can I call you right afterwards?
So you're saying the initial flow could be a lot of.
No matter what, we call it zava today.
I understand, but is it possible that initial flow could be a solid flow?
Sure. Because we no longer know exactly what's called on time and not on time. That's why we apply zava to everything. It seems like it's on time, but it's not. We don't know. That's our Chacham instituted that we treat everything like zava. Okay. Now, the men's version of that, the men's version of that is different. The men's version is actually a white flow. The closest we can come to describing it, thank you, is it's a form of an venereal disease of some sort of an STD.
Are you talking about what can make us impure?
That makes us a zav.
A zav,
Would make a man a zav.
which means impure.
That in that form of impurity, the impurity of zav.
Sorry.
I think they describe it as gonorrhea.
Gonorrhea, fine. Why not?
Too impure.
Why not? Gonorrhea works. Okay. I think we're gonna lose the lights in a few minutes. Okay.
Okay, got it.
So a woman's zava flow is going to be red. A man's zav flow is going to be white. Now, just for clarity, there's a difference between a zav flow is an unaroused flow. An aroused flow is called keri, semen. And that's a whole different tumah that only requires immersion in a mikveh, biblically, that requires just immersion in a mikveh and harav shemesh. Has to wait till that night. But not a zav. A zav flow is a white flow emitting unaroused. It's just coming out. He said gonorrhea. Thank God I wouldn't know gonorrhea if it punched me in the face. So I've heard from other rabbis. I've heard it from other rabbis as well that zav is gonorrhea. Okay, maybe that's the closest thing we come to.
So
Okay.
So you're saying both are impurities, but different ones.
Both are impurities. In the woman, it would manifest itself as blood, red. In a man, it would manifest itself as white flow.
So the aroused and the unaroused are both impurities.
Yes, but very different
Very
impurities. Very, very different. The aroused impurity, in other words, every time a man has relations with his wife,
Mhm.
he's considered a Baal Keri. So he really should go to the mikveh the next day, which was a conversation we had before we started tonight. Yeah. Okay? Right. But he's not a Zav. In other words, a Baal Keri, for instance, a man that has relations with his wife, he has a level of impurity that requires him to go to the mikveh, but if he touches somebody else, he doesn't make that person impure.
Mhm.
But a Zav does,
Oh, I see. Okay.
for instance. Baal Keri, if he sits on a bed, nothing happens. The bed is fine. A Zav sits on a bed, the whole bed becomes tummy.
Interesting. All right.
Could be 10 sheets, one on top of the other, they all become tummy.
Same severity as Zava, right?
Huh?
The same severity as Zava.
Yes, the Zav and Zava both have the same laws, correct. Their emission is different, but the laws are the same. Okay? But there's one other difference when it comes to the Zav. The Zav, it depends how many emissions he has. If he has only one emission, even though it was an unaroused emission, we assume that he experienced some sort of arousal. But if he has more emissions, he has a level of impurity that requires him to go to the mikveh, but if he touches somebody else, he doesn't make that person impure. There go the lights. You can still see me. But,
That's all that matters.
somebody want to? Okay. Somebody want to go turn the lights back on? You can.
How do I do it?
You know how to do it?
You know how to do it?
Next to the bathrooms, when you go through that hallway in the bathrooms, if you close that door when you go inside, behind it you'll see like a time clock. You know what time clocks look like? Open up that box of the time clock. There's an on-off button. Just push the on-off button. That's it. Okay? So so if he sees only one, we treat it like it would be pretty much a Balkari. We don't assume that he's a Zav. He goes to the mikveh, and that's it. If he has a second one 2 days in a row, now we call him a Zav. Because this happened 2 days in a row. If he has a third one 3 days in a row, then he's a real Zav. And what happens is, not only does he now have to wait 7 days to cleanse himself. Thank you. Not only does he have to wait 7 days to cleanse himself, but a Zav, like a Zava, has to bring sacrifices at the end of the cleansing period.
So the one that makes you a Balkari, if you do it 2 days in a row, it promotes you.
If a person
brings
has
yourself.
2 flows 2 days in a row, both unaroused, we assume this is gonorrhea, and therefore we're going to call him now a Zav.
Okay, I see.
If he has it 3 days in a row, he's not just a Zav, but he's also going to have to bring a sacrifice.
Does it end by itself?
Usually,
The Zav guy ends by itself?
we hope so. It should. Okay? Now with all that introduction,
It wasn't like so like a
we can
series.
now read out, yes, we can now read our one-line Mishnah. The Mishnah in one line says, Ein bein zav, haraya shtei riyos, l'raya shalosh. There's no difference between a zav who saw 2 emissions versus 3 emissions. Ella carbon. The only difference is that the one who does 3, the one who has 3 emissions, is now going to have to bring a carbon, a sacrifice at the end of the 7 days of his cleansing. The one who saw only 2 is not going to have to bring sacrifices at the end of his cleansing.
Was it like a punishment visited upon him like Sarah, or something else?
I've never seen that. I've never seen that commentary. Okay? So the Gemara immediately is going to now introduce us. We'll just spend another few minutes on this. The Gemara now is going to introduce us to, okay, like all the other Ein Bain so far, now we say, okay, if this is the only difference between them, then what are they the same? 2 versus 3 has to be the same. When it says Ein Ben is saying this is the only difference. So if this is the only difference, then everything. So what was the Mishnah referring to where they are the same, where they're not different? So the Gemara says, but when it comes to making everything they sit on tamei, or everything they lay on tamei, or the requirement to count 7 clean days, because you only saw one zav, you only go to the mikveh. All you need is 1 clean day, and he goes to the mikveh, and that night he's done. If he sees 2 days in a row, now he has to count 7 days, the Mishnah says. If he sees 3 days in a row, he not only has to count 7 clean days, but he's going to have to bring a sacrifice. That's what the Mishnah said. But when it comes to making other things tamei, they're both the same, 2 or 3. So the Gemara says, Minan Emili, where'd you get that? Where's the pasuk that says that?
Rabbi,
Yes.
why do we treat all female discharges as Zava, but male as Balkari?
Because our sages decided that that women were no longer able to really keep track of when is exactly their menstrual cycle versus their non-menstrual cycle. And so the Chachamim instituted that we do it all. Actually, I think if I'm not mistaken, the Gemara says the women took it upon themselves as a hinder mitzvah. And it became accepted widespread. So the Gemara asks, immediately, where do we get these words from? Tan Rabbanan, our sages taught. Rav Simoi says, Mona Kosov Shtayim. The pasuk, yes, that's correct. We're on page 83 now. The verse counted 2 for Kare Tomei and called him Tomei, impure. Then the pasuk says Shalosh, three sightings for Kare Tomei, and again called him Tomei. So why does the Torah have to say both? Yeah, impure.
Impure.
Look over here in 25 and 26. The verse says, Ish ki zav mibsarei zoivei tamehu. Any man who will have an emission from his flesh, because of his emission, he becomes tameh, impure. The verse mentions emission twice in that verse and says that the zav becomes tameh. So since it says it twice, emission zav mibsarei zoivei, that's how we know 2. But the next verse then says, "V'zoi siya tumasai b'zoivai." This will be his tuma, his impurity, when he has an emission. Rar b'sarai, whether his flesh runs with his emission, oy zoivai oy hechtim b'sarai, or becomes stopped up because of his emission. All that is tummy. So here it says the emission 3 times in the verse. So one verse has the emissions twice, one verse has the emission 3 times. So the Gemara says, Shtayim Latuma, the first one is to tell you that he becomes tummy and has to wait 7 days. Shalosh L'Karbon. The third one adds a sacrifice. So now the Gemara just is playing with us. And we're going to look at this. Okay. Yes, we're going to have to learn something else from 2 than from 3. Right? And we're saying 2 makes a person tummy, 3 makes him have to bring impure, and 3 makes him have to bring a sacrifice. That's what we're saying so far. Maybe that's not it. Maybe we should look at it a different way. Says the Gemara. Ve'emer, let's say instead, shtayim lekarbon v'lo letuma. Maybe 2 makes him obligated to bring a sacrifice, but he's not actually tummy. And shalish, I think I skipped a line. I skipped. Back it up. The aimer first, let's say, shtayim l'tuma v'loy l'karbon. Maybe 2, he becomes tameh but doesn't bring a sacrifice. But 3, he has to bring a carbon, but it does not become tameh. That doesn't become impure. Right? Wait. So the Gemara says that's not logical. That's completely not logical. Why? Amrit, because the answer to that is Ad Rosh Time. Before he got a chance to see 3, he saw 2. So you're telling me 2, he'll become tameh, becomes impure, but no sacrifice. 3, we're saying maybe he has to bring a sacrifice, but he doesn't become tameh. That doesn't make any sense. He's already tameh for the 2. 3 is 1 more than 2. If you went to the first grade, you know that. That's the Gemara's basic response. Okay? Did you want to say something?
In terms of obligation to bring sacrifice, if women are considered zav out of doubt, are they also obligated to bring sacrifice?
For sure.
Every single cycle has to bring.
Yeah.
So then, how do you do that?
It's going to be a lot of fun.
So how do you do that? How do these days? How do you do it?
That's going to, but you can't bring the sacrifices.
Saying
It's going to be a backlog.
So
It's going to be interesting. You know, I add that, yes, you're correct, and I add that to my list of not my problem that Mashiach figured that one out. Not my problem. Whatever it's going to be, it's going to be. It's fine by me. Okay? So the Gemara says that's not a logical argument, and so therefore it doesn't make any, you can't argue that. So the Gemara gives you a different opportunity. Let's say, shtayim lekarbon, 2 have to bring a sacrifice, but they don't become impure. Shalosh, and the third one becomes tameh 2 in addition to sacrifice. So Gemara says, that doesn't sound reasonable. Why? The Tanya, because we learned in the Brisa. The verse says that the Kohen will bring him atonement from his flow, from his Zav. That means from his Zav means not all Zavim. Mixes of Mavian carbon, mixes of an Ein Mavian carbon. How would you explain? So that means only some people bring and some don't bring. Some Zavs. How would that work? Ra Shalosh maybe. If he saw 3 sightings, then he has to bring a carbon. Shtayim Ein maybe. Or you're going to say differently. Ra Beis maybe Ra Shalosh Ein maybe. Amatat Shalish Ra Shalosh Ra Shtayim. We need both of these. We need both verses. The one we got from Rav Simai, and also from the second verse, Mizoive. Why? The Imid Rav Simai, if you would have from Rav Simai where you had the 2 verses, one that says 2, one says 3, Havamin, I would have thought Kikushan, Kamashmalan, that your questions, Kikushan, like you asked about it, Kamashmalan Mizoive. That's why you need the extra verse Mizoive. If you would have had just the words Mizoive, yes, you wouldn't have known how many are the 2 different levels. Kamash Malan, Rav Simai. We'll do a little bit more. Now that you said Mizoive l'drasha, that Mizoive, the word Mizoive is used to expound and to teach you something new. What are you going to do with the verse that says, when the Zav now chooses to become clean? What are you going to learn from that? Oh, that verse, look at the Tanya. We need it for a different brisa. What does it say in that other brisa? That's a reference to when he will, in fact, he ceases the mission. Immediately he begins counting his 7 clean days. But not if he also has tzaras. If the Zov was also afflicted with tzaras, he may count his 7 days free of emission even while he is still a Mitzorah. Because the Mitzorah also has to count 7 clean days. Someone who had tzaras, you know what tzaras was? Loosely be translated as leprosy, but it wasn't. It was a spiritual disease that came for speaking Lashon Hara.
Spiritual disease?
It was a physical malady that presented itself in a whiteness of the skin, but it was a punishment for Lashon Hara. And a Mitzorah also becomes impure and has to be sent out of the camp.
When was that?
Biblical times.
Oh, what was a Mikveh Institute?
Right up front. It's
No,
in the
saying,
Torah.
So, like, what did women do before? What women would go to like natural water and
What they do in the desert?
yeah, they go
They
in
use
natural water.
the well of Miriam.
They go in there.
Was there mikveh? Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. Living waters. So v'safa limit al zol bal shteirias shetan sfira shiva. The verse says he will count. That teaches you that a zav who only saw 2 emissions, he needs to count 7 days. So the Gemara says, "Vali didn't who? Why can't you learn it out from a kal v'chomer?" Remember we told what a kal v'chomer was? Lenient versus stringent, and it's a logical argument. If he makes, if everything he comes in contact with, he makes it impure, turn shiva, he's not going to have to wait 7 days. You know what? This is where we're going to stop because the analysis of this kal v'chomer is going to be a little bit complicated. And it'll take us another 25 minutes. So if we could do something another 2 minutes, we'd finish. But another 25-minute analysis, we'll wait for next week. So next week, what we're going to... next week there's no class, obviously. It's Tisha B'Av. Next Wednesday night is Tisha B'Av. So either we'll be partying at the Beit HaMikdash. It'll be the party to end all parties next Wednesday night. Or Unfortunately, if Chas v'Shalom, Mashiach is not here, we'll be reading Eicha that night. Okay. B'chaim, everybody. Have a blessed evening.
Thanks for telling me. Appreciate it.